Saya ingin memperkenalkan Alan Samson. Alan Samson adalah kawan saya sejak Mei 98, peristiwa Mei 98. Beliau banyak bantu untuk imigrasi ke Amerika, termasuk suaka politik. Alan juga salah satu board member. Saya beruntung ketemu Alan karena saya juga jadi board member dari Lincoln University karena Alan. Ya, saya beruntung sekali. Alan, silakan. Dan Alan bisa sedikit ngomong bahasa Indonesia, walaupun sudah lama tidak berkunjung atau tinggal di Indonesia. Waktu itu 2 tahun ya, tinggal. Coba saya ambil. Alan akan bicara tentang imigrasi. Jadi, bapak ibu yang ingin tanya setelah ini, silakan ya. Tapi mungkin Alan, you can bicara mengenai the few things that I mentioned, ya. Okay. Thank you.
Selamat siang. Nama saya Alan Samson. 40 tahun yang lalu saya bisa bicara bahasa Indonesia, tapi tidak sekarang lagi. Saya terlalu tua sekarang. So saya akan bicara di dalam bahasa Inggris. 35 tahun yang lalu saya menghadiri upacara perkawinan. And at the time, when you go to a wedding, you must offer congratulations. And everybody said, "Selamat berbahagia." I was a little nervous, so to the beautiful newly couple, I said, "Selamat berbahagia." So the word bahaya is important now to immigration because keadaan sekarang sangat bahaya. And I'm gonna talk a little bit about some of the problems I think you or your children or your brothers or sisters or your grandchildren may be facing. I will speak on some of the topics that John suggested, but after I finish, I'm certainly happy to take any questions from the audience. The most serious topic, or the most serious situation for you is, I presume you're all fine here, maybe you want to invite your children here, or your grandchildren, or brothers or sisters. You must plan very carefully, because from now on, under the present administration of President Trump, there's going to be extreme measures to make certain that nobody who comes to the United States in green card status is likely to be a public charge. And thousands of people all over the world, I predict, when they did their interview at the American consulate from whatever country, thousands of people are probably going to be rejected because the consul will give the opinion following the guidelines of the current administration. The consul is likely to give the opinion that this person is likely to become a public charge. Public charge means you are likely to receive welfare or assistance from the United States government. So if there's any suspicion on the part that somebody, a candidate for a green card status, is likely to become a public charge, I think akan ditolak. And I'm just telling you this now because when you discuss this issue with your family or your nephews or your children or your grandchildren, make certain that they have sufficient financial situation so that they will never be refused as likely to ever receive any American government public assistance or welfare. If they can open up a bank account in Indonesia or in the United States before to show that they have sufficient funds, that's the best of all possible things to do. If they're old, let's say you bring your brother or sister here is old, and if their health is not too good, they may likely be rejected on the basis that they're likely to go on welfare, receive assistance, unless they can show they have sufficient money in the bank. This is going to be a serious problem. Now, I'd like to also talk about some general questions. John suggested I make a few remarks in order of importance. The first question is, can you invite your brothers, your sisters, your parents, or your children under 18 years old to the United States. I presume you mean invite them as a green card, or I'll talk about it, invite them as a green card holder and invite them as a tourist. The most difficult issue that I predict in the next 2 or 3 years is that the Trump administration may attempt to eliminate the category of brothers and sisters. If you have already applied for your brother or sister to come to the United States as a green card holder, it's okay. It will not be tiakan ditolak, but if you have not applied in the future, I believe it is very possible that they may withdraw the category for brothers and sisters. It takes a long time anyway. It's now 12, 13, 14 years. But if you were thinking about doing it, inviting your brother or sister, applying for them as a green card holder, do it now, don't wait. I think for the children are safe. For the time being, parents are safer than brothers and sisters, but parents will possibly come after brothers and sisters. So any family member that you're thinking of applying for, my recommendation would be to do it as soon as possible. Now, if President Trump is no longer president after 2020, this may change, but change comes slowly. So any change that he implements between now and 2020 is likely to remain for at least a couple of years after 2020. So this is why my advice to you is, if you're thinking about doing it now, be prepared for the wait. The same thing is true, less officially, but inviting people to come on a tourist visa. If you invite your children to come, if your children are married, it's probably best if only one of them comes, if the wife comes alone and not with her husband. Or if the wife and husband come together, they leave their children behind. Because a family that applies together is going to raise suspicion that the real purpose is not to come to the United States as a tourist, but the real purpose is to stay here and think about applying for a green card. So make sure their financial situation is in order, and at least the first time, if you invite your daughter and her husband, maybe it's better if your daughter comes and her husband stays in Indonesia with his job. Or if they both come together, if they have a house in Indonesia, make sure that they categorize the entire value of the house, what the house is worth, and how much money they have in the bank. So the situation is not as serious if they come as a visitor as it is if you apply for them for a green card. But trust me, I have been practicing immigration law for more than 30 years now, 35 years approximately, and this is the most serious situation I've ever seen. Most lawyers welcome serious situations because it means more money, but I have made enough money in my career, so I'm just giving you my frank advice: be very careful. And whatever you do, make sure you approach the problem logically and carefully. So you can invite your brothers and sisters, you can apply for them for a green card, you can apply for your children, but make certain that they have enough financial resources. Another question that John suggested I address is that if you are in the United States illegally, can you get a green card? Good question. I'll answer it yes and no. I'll say first yes, second no. You can get a green card if you are here illegally, but the basic reason is if you apply for asylum and state that you're afraid to return to Indonesia because you're afraid you'll be prejudiced or discriminated against in Indonesia. Now, this was a very good reason, and many Indonesian people gained asylum in 1999, 2000, 2001 because of the violent situation. There were anti-Chinese riots in Indonesia in 1998 and 1999, but that was 20 years ago, and it is no longer considered to be an acceptable or valid reason. If you apply on the basis that you are a Christian and you're afraid to remain there because of Muslims burning down churches or whatever, it's considered a bit more seriously, but it's also not considered the best reason to apply. I always advise my clients, if you have a better reason, try and use the better reason. But if you're here illegally, that's perhaps right now, the only reason that you are able to apply for asylum, ultimately leading for a green card. If you came in the United States, let's say you came 20 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 5 years ago on a tourist visa, and you liked it, you stayed. You didn't go back, you stayed, you got a job, and your status is officially illegal because you don't have a green card. What can you do? Aha, that's a difficult situation. If you get married to a husband or a wife, they'll give you an interview, but the chances are there's a risk at the interview. If you show up, you'll be arrested. 5 years ago, this would never have happened. It is happening now, and I caution my clients, don't do it. The advice I give is what I would say to you if I were in that situation myself. Would I do something? And I probably would say to myself, I'd be very careful. I probably would not do anything. Now, with that said, a little different situation. Let's say you've been here 10 years. You have married an American citizen. Or you married somebody who became an American citizen. You have children born in the United States, but you're legal. What can you do under those circumstances? You can apply, your legal spouse, wife, or husband can apply for a green card for you, and the original petition will probably be approved, but don't go for the interview. What should you do then? There is a new tactic which was put into operation 3 or 4 years ago called a waiver, like forgiveness. And you could apply for a waiver, and if the waiver is granted, it means you can go back to Indonesia safely and have your interview. If the waiver is not granted, you should not go back. I've had 13 or 14 cases where the waiver was granted, and in every one of those cases, the person went back and was able to get a green card. Now, what do they look for in the waiver? It's a waiver, basically an application for mercy. You say, I've been here for 10 years, I'm married, I have never been arrested, I have 2 children, 8 and 9 years old, or 8 and 10 years old. I cannot go back to Indonesia. Let's say my wife is not Indonesian, she doesn't speak Indonesian, the children don't. It would be very difficult for my wife and my children. And to strengthen your application, I always, to strengthen the application of my clients, I always invite them or recommend them that they see a therapist, see a psychiatrist or a psychologist who can write an excellent paper for them, a report or an evaluation saying that the person is deeply emotionally injured. And if their husband or wife was likely to go back, they would be deeply emotionally injured, they could not carry on. Or if the person was taking care of their mother and father in the United States, how could you go back to Indonesia with your husband or wife if you have to stay here and take care of your mother and father who are 80 or 90 years old? So all these are exceptional circumstances. And if somebody would come to me, I examine their situation and say, it doesn't do any harm to apply for a waiver. If it's accepted, it's probably okay to return, even though you return to Indonesia for an interview for 1 or 2 weeks, even though you've been in the United States. If the waiver is not approved, let's say the person had a criminal record, or let's say the children were only 1 or 2 years old and there's no harm to the children in a 1 or 2 year old going back to Indonesia, then there would be a 14 or 15-year-old who already has built up a social life in the United States. So the age of the children is looked for. So if somebody comes to me, I try and examine the entire situation, the totality of the complete circumstances, and then give advice. But if you can apply for a waiver and it's approved, you're okay in my opinion. Of course, I'm sure nobody here has been arrested. Anybody here been to jail? No, don't raise your hand. If you apply for a waiver and you've been arrested, forget about it. You're wasting your money. If you apply for a waiver, but you had only one case of drunk driving 4 years ago, forget about it. They'll refuse the waiver because you've had a conviction of drunk driving. If you've had a conviction of drunk driving 10 years ago and you went to school and you've had no conviction since then, no charges since then you may be okay. But once again, the waiver is only good If you're not in the United States legally, if you're married to an American citizen, you have American children, and your wife has American mother and father, who he or she must take care of. So this doesn't happen too often. It's not likely it will, but if it does, I think that you should see a lawyer to get a professional opinion on that. So you can get a green card that way, but never, 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 if you're illegal in the United States, never, ever, ever go for any interview. I don't mean an interview with the hospital, but I mean an interview with an immigration interview. Some of you may be permanent residents, and you may be considering applying to become naturalized American citizens. Younger people, I say, if you get to be a citizen and you're arrested for drugs, you'll still keep your citizenship. But if you're a green card holder and you're arrested for drugs or convicted, you will not keep your citizenship. They will attempt to deport you back to your home country. But you don't look like drug takers here, nobody does. And in this situation, I would advise you, it's cost a little extra money, but it's always nicer to be an American citizen than to be just a green card holder. You probably can keep your Indonesian passport even if you become an American citizen. It gives you more freedom, and it's not very difficult. From the time of applying for naturalization, you have an interview in between 6 and 8 months, and the interviewing officer will simply look to see if you're eligible for citizenship, if you've been here long enough. Based upon your biometrics or fingerprints, they will look to see if you have a criminal record, which will make sure that you will not get to be a citizen. But if your record is clean, if your record is clear, I think it's a very good idea. You lose nothing by it. It's not very expensive, and it's always nicer for safety purposes to be a citizen of the United States. Now, right now, it's an exceedingly or extremely difficult situation. You're probably not in it. You're all quite safe and secure, but you may have nephews or nieces or grandchildren who are not in your safe and secure situation. For your nephews and nieces or your grandchildren, if they have green card, if they only have green cards and not citizens, the first thing I advise you to tell them to do is apply for citizenship. Unless they've had criminal record, and unless they've had drunk driving. If they've been convicted of drunk driving, they've gone to school, and they wait 5 years, and they had no bad things happen to them, no bad things that they've done for more than a 5-year period, after probation is finished, then it's okay, but not before. So any young people, my advice would be absolutely apply for citizenship. This situation now is extremely, extremely perilous, difficult for anybody in a semi-legal immigration status. Even if you have a green card, and only a green card, even if you're 40, 50, 60 years old, you're never completely safe. Let's say you go to Indonesia and your mother becomes ill, and you take care of her, and you remain outside the United States for 7 months. You'll be questioned. Why did you remain outside for 7 months? Nothing will probably happen to you, but if you do this more than 1 time or 2 times, they could place you in deportation proceedings. Or let's say your mother becomes ill, you can care for her, and she passes away, unfortunately, and you've been in Indonesia for more than a year. They will stop you at the airport and attempt to take away your green card. So be very careful. If you return to Indonesia, try and make certain, if you have a green card, if you're a citizen, you're okay. If you have a green card and you return to Indonesia on a visit, try and make certain it's for less than 6 months, first choice. Second choice, between 6 months and 1 year, not as good, but better than 1 year. But if you've been in Indonesia for longer than 1 year, danger point. And this should not come about at all. Also, if you have a green card and you're thinking about applying for citizenship, when you apply, the U.S. government looks back at your travel pattern for the previous 5 years. And what they look to see is, has this person been outside the United States for more than 50% of the time for the previous 5 years? If it's more than 50% of the time, they'll reject your application. They'll probably tell you to apply again in several months when you get below the 50% mark. but it's a waste of money. The application is probably $800 or so. Why waste it if you don't have to spend the money? But if you travel, try and keep your trips below 6 months. Tell that to your children as well. Now I'll get back to my original topic that I mentioned about the dangerousness of the situation. And if you have a green card now and you're hospitalized and you use up all of your money and you sell your house to get treatment, or your husband or wife sells the house to get treatment, and you go on welfare, it's okay because you're already a long-time green card holder. But if you're a new green card holder, then that dangerous situation comes about. So make certain that any new green card holders, even if they're young, certainly if they're old, can show enough money, or somebody can show enough money to take care of them so they will not become a public charge to the United States. This president, in my opinion, is basically anti-immigrant. The immigrants he likes are immigrants from Europe. He prefers immigrants from Europe than immigrants from Africa, or immigrants from Asia, or immigrants from South America. So be very careful, because I'm sure most of you fit in that last category. I have gone over what I think are the major problems I think you face. I'm happy to answer any questions. I don't think too many of you will have serious questions, because you all look comfortable and thriving and probably more wealthy than I am. But if you do have any questions, I'm certainly happy to answer anything, or try to answer anything.
How about when they apply for the green card, right? When the kids still young, and then by the time they got the interview, the kids is already like 30-something.
The question is, when you apply for the green card and the children are young, there's an age factor involved, and if the children have their interview after they're 21, it's a waiting period, of course, could be 5, 7, 8 years. If the children are more than 21, will they get the green card or not? That's a very good question. It's done by computer. I cannot answer that. It depends when the application was first submitted.
Oh, you answered the application,
yes, yeah.
not the time when the interview?
Also, the application and the time when the interview, there's a pattern that the government uses. And every time I face that situation, I have to look it up on the computer myself. I don't have it in my head. But in most cases, in most situations, somebody who's 22 or 23 will be able to get the green card. But if too much time has passed, let's say you apply for your brother or your sister, it's a 13-year time period. The brother or sister has children. The children are now 18 years old, and 13 years will be 31. Are they likely to get a green card? Probably not. Too much time has passed. Anyone else?
How about the adoptions, Alan? Child adoption.
That's a difficult thing, because in the past, your brother or sister could bring his or her child to the United States on a tourist visa, and then they could say that they're too poor to take care of the child, and that you could adopt the child would stay with you for 2 years, and then apply for a green card. It may be the case, it's maybe the case in some countries, but regarding most countries have signed the Hague Convention, and you have to apply for adoption for the child in China, or in Thailand, or in Indonesia. Indonesia, I think, is also a signing country of the Hague Convention. I may be wrong, but I think it is. In that case, adopting a child after the child comes on a tourist visa would not be possible. The appropriate thing to do would be to try and adopt the child in Indonesia, have the child wait in Indonesia until the adoption is completed, and then you can petition for your then legal adopted child at that time. But I've had several clients who came to me wanting to adopt a child, and I used to do several adoptions a year until 5 years ago, and I was always able to get a green card for the adopted children. But now it's difficult, and it's impossible, and it's dangerous. So now I usually refer them to an attorney who specializes in adoption. These are adoptions under the Hague Convention. The Hague is a city in Holland, and the convention is a treaty. The Hague Convention is where the city where the treaty was signed, and most countries in the world will agree to the new adoption procedures and new adoption rules. So you can adopt the child here, but it will not be recognized for immigration purposes.
As far as adopting a child, what's the maximum age?
For adopting a child, 16 before 16.
Before 16 years old.
Before they have to have their interview in front of the judge before 16. Then formally you can apply for green card. But any adoption must take place before 16. If you want to help a friend, if you're 60 years old and your friend is 55, and you say, well, I'll adopt you, it doesn't work.
Okay, any question? Ada pertanyaan? Ada pertanyaan? Nggak ada? Okay.
Yes, Julia.
Hang on just a moment. Just a moment. Okay, sebentar ya. Sebentar. So she has a grandson. Yeah, that is 13 years old. Okay. And your question?
I don't want to adopt to him to come here.
Your daughter live here.
Your daughter wants you to adopt
My
him?
daughter, yeah, my daughter,
So the daughter who lives here wants to adopt the
sister,
the kid of her sister.
She'd have to adopt in Indonesia. Formerly, the kid could come to the United States, she could adopt the child in the United States, and the child could get a green card 2 years later. But now, because of the new law, the Hague Convention or the Hague Treaty, that's not possible. So the adoption would have to take place in Indonesia according to Indonesian laws. And from what I know is your daughter could not adopt long distance. She would have to go to Indonesia, live for at least a year or 2 years in Indonesia while the adoption was taking place. You cannot have non-present adoption. So she would have to go to Indonesia. It can be done, but your daughter would have to go to Indonesia and live in Indonesia. Really?
Okay, just a question for Ibu Yuli.
thank you. I have a question. If my brother my niece sponsored her father, and then got the green card already.
The father got the green card?
Yeah, and then she's going to, and then the son is still in Indonesia. He's gonna come. How about the wife?
The wife is, I never could understand this because it's a more difficult procedure. The father, who's now a green card holder, can sponsor the son. He can also apply to sponsor the wife, but sponsoring the wife takes several years longer. So the wife will not be able to come over for several years. The man can go to Indonesia and wait together with his wife for 6 months at a time. He has to be going back and forth to live with her until the priority date for his wife is current. It's easier for a new green card holder to bring their children over than it is to bring their wife.
Oh, okay. So that means he has to go back and forth to Indonesia.
Back and forth until he becomes a U.S. citizen. Then he can apply for his wife, and it takes 5 years to become a U.S. citizen.
Oh, so the stepdaughter cannot bring her to come here. The stepdaughter is a citizen.
Oh, the stepdaughter. Can the stepdaughter apply for the stepfather?
No. So the daughter, the real daughter, apply for the father. So and then now can the daughter, the stepdaughter, apply for the stepmother?
The new mother.
Yeah.
If the marriage took place before the stepdaughter was 18 years old, yes. If the marriage took place after the stepdaughter was 18 years old.
Oh, when she was little, he remarried.
Well then, I think the stepdaughter is able to apply for the stepmother.
Okay.
But the stepdaughter, as long as the marriage took place before 18 years old, and the waiting period for a stepdaughter applying for stepmom would be not too long. I don't know how long, but no more than a couple of years.
But she can apply for the stepmom.
Yes, but not the husband. The husband would have to be a citizen before he applies for his new wife.
I see.
But the stepdaughter can apply for the new wife. The new wife is her stepmother.
Yes.
If the marriage took place before the stepdaughter was 18 years old.
Yeah, when she was little, she already remarried with his son.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, any other question? That's it?
Terima kasih banyak. Saya menghargai sekali.
So the advice is that you're a citizen.
My advice is don't start selling drugs.
Alright, Alan. Thank you, man. Mari kita tepuk tangan buat Alan.